All right, guys, welcome to Creative Cow Live. This is episode 2 of After Effects live training. Excuse me. I am aware I'm talking to nobody right now. We just started the stream. So I'm just going to kind of hang tight and wait. This is that opportunity. This is that time for those who come onto the stream to pick my brain, ask questions, and get prepared to get some learning done. So it looks like a couple of you guys are already popping on here. Again, this is Levi here. I'm with Creative Cow, and this is Creative Cow Live. What I do is a weekly After Effects live training seminar where you guys get to interact with me, ask questions, and I usually just choose a topic and go from there. So if you're in the video right now, if you're there, go ahead and type in the chat, say hi or something. Let me know what you guys are up to. We're going to be starting the live stream here, starting the training portion about 8 a.m. So we got about 14 minutes left here. This is what we're going to be working with today. We're going to be creating this clock here. Well, not specifically this clock, but we're going to be essentially learning how to use After Effects expressions and pairing them, or rather, we're going to learn how to pair them together with After Effects expression controllers. Essentially, After Effects, as great of a tool as it is, does have its limitations, and so there comes a time in everybody's journey in After Effects, to essentially pop in there and start expanding on the capabilities of Adobe After Effects. And expressions are a great way to do that, but expression controllers are an even more wonderful way of getting some custom functionality built into your expressions. And if you guys have used After Effects for a while, I'm willing to bet that you guys have used expressions before at some point or another. Lots of great tutorials out there. One example is the wiggle tool, right? The wiggle expression. We've all used that at some point or another, I'm sure. Believe it or not, that is an After Effects expression. It is JavaScript code. You're just calling a function on the back end of After Effects, and essentially it takes your input values, jumbles them around, and returns a value. In that case, wiggling your expression for your position or your scale or your opacity, things of that nature. I always find myself doing a lot of talking here right at the get-go because I want to give you guys a chance to get in and get comfortable, maybe open up After Effects on your computer if you guys are sitting in front of it and want to follow along. We got about 13 minutes until 8 a.m., and that's when we're going to be going live. Again, folks, for those just tuning in, we are going to be learning how to use After Effects expressions and pairing them together with After Effects expression controllers to give us like a ton of unique capabilities that normally you wouldn't have extended to you, just off the get-go. Now, AE expressions and the controls are extremely useful. Looks like we got one person. Looks like we got two people joining on now. After Effects, AE expressions can essentially be used to control any keyframeable, item. So if you're using an effect like glow and you want to essentially create a controller that allows you to increase the glow intensity, right, and to keyframe that all onto one single layer, you guys can do that. Same thing with any other transform properties like scale, position, rotation, opacity. Pretty much anything that is keyframeable is controllable with an AE expression controller. This is typically how people build motion graphic templates for Adobe Premiere. They will build out a project inside of After Effects, and then they will essentially export it into a motion graphics template, and all those controls that they built in essentially come carried with that project. And so you're able to just use Premiere, open up After Effects. Actually, you don't even need to open up After Effects, excuse me. You just work from right inside your Premiere project. It's a real useful tool to use. A lot of you guys have probably experienced using templates or things like that you bought online, that motion graphic templates that allow you to do things like change the text and the font and things like that. It's all using these AE controllers. So we're just going to get started here in a few minutes. If you guys are here, jump in the chat, say hi. Now's your time to ask any questions you guys might have about After Effects expressions or just in general any After Effects questions you might have. I'm happy to try and answer anything that I can for you guys, and I want to interact with you and make this fun. So By all means, say hello, jump in the chat. Um, it's a beautiful morning here in Arizona, and again, I just feel like I'm just sitting here having to having to use my gift of gab and just kind of keep things exciting and interesting until we get started, because otherwise, you're just going to be sitting there and waiting. All right, 7:50. We've got about 10 minutes left before we get started. So we got about 10 minutes until we get started. Thanks for hopping on. If you guys are on, I'm gonna just real quick put a poll out into the to the live chat here. If you guys want to jump in and interact there, if you guys have any questions before we get started about anything After Effects or anything to do with AE expressions or the controllers that you guys can use to pair together and create some really dynamic, procedural compositions or work projects. This is a great thing to do if you find yourself in After Effects and you're repeating a lot of the same tasks over and over again for work or for personal projects. A lot of times, you find yourself every time you wanted to create an effect or create some type of project, you might just start from scratch each time. And that's great for practice and getting used to things. But if you want to just obfuscate that and make a workflow that's very quick, you just open a project, change a couple settings, and hit render. This is definitely the live training you guys are going to want to check out. All right, guys. Looks like a bunch of you are starting to kind of tune in here. We do these live trainings weekly. This is going to be a every day Wednesday, or excuse me, each week on Wednesdays at 8 a.m. Arizona time. We're going to be hopping on and doing some live training. I want you guys to challenge me, ask me questions, make suggestions for different tutorials or trainings that we can do. I'm actually thinking next week we've got the new Spider-Man movie coming out, and that Doctor Strange spell, that breaks the multiverse looks pretty awesome. I was thinking about maybe popping in there and giving that a try next week. In respects to the new Spider-Man movie coming out this Friday. So we're not going to be creating this exact effect that you guys see here in this video, but this was used or created uh, evening before last. What I did was I essentially built out a custom clock and added a lot of different effects to it and backgrounds and did some stuff with the text. And pretty much it's all controlled using After Effects expressions and the controls. So an example, just in case you guys are, tired of hearing me repeat that process over and over again, different types of expression controllers that you have available to you. They're under the effects pad. You've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. You got 8 different controllers with the most recent release of After Effects. You've got a 3D point control, and 3D point controls are just as it sounds. It's for essentially controlling a point in 3D space. You can keyframe it from that controller. You have an angle controller. Angle controls are great for controlling things like rotation and things of that nature. We're going to be using that quite extensively here today. Checkbox controls are, it's just an on-off switch essentially. And if you guys get, fancy with, or creative thinking outside the box of how you could use this, you can toggle on and off the transparency of layers. You can toggle on and off lots of different functionalities. Essentially, whether you want to have a speed ramp on or a speed ramp off, if you want to have the color correction layer turned on or if the color correction layer turned off. Checkbox controllers are exactly as they sound. They're for checking on or off items. You have a color control here, and the color control is just again as it sounds. It's essentially a way for you to obfuscate and control different colors. This is real useful. In fact, I've found a most recent use for this where I had a huge project, and the project had, God, it probably had like 10 or 15 different layers that all needed to have an effect applied to them, and that effect had a color value assigned to it. And the colors had to be the same between all 10 of those layers. And so, and those layers had multiple lists of effects applied to them. So essentially what I found myself doing, very frustratingly, was every time I needed to change that color, I would have to go through each of those 10 layers, find the effect there that corresponds to that color control, and then manually change that color. And so that means copying and pasting the hex code or the color code to each of those. And it takes about 5-10 minutes. What I was essentially able to do is extrapolate and have all of those different color values reference one simple color control. So it saved me a ton of time. I only had to change something there once, and it went ahead and changed everything else. Drop-down menu controls are kind of like checkbox controllers, where you can essentially have a drop-down of many different options, and depending on which one you choose, it will change whatever you've coded it to change. You got point control. Point control is just like a 3D controller, except it's over 2D. Slider control. Slider control is for essentially scaling up or scaling down the value of a number, and that number would of course correspond to whatever transform property that you have it connected to. So that's pretty neat. Then the last one is it is the layer control here. Layer control. It's very similar to just like an After Effects expression to begin with, or an After Effects control layer when you build that out. Essentially, what you can do is you can have an effect reference the value of an effect on a different layer. So you would use a layer drop-down control, and you would choose the layer that you want to pull the value from, and say that layer had a like a glow control on it. You could essentially tell all of your corresponding layers that you wanted to continue and have that control. You could essentially use the drop-down control in your control layer, choose the layer that has the value you want to keep, and then you would just point all of those other layers to that drop-down layer controller. So real neat tool. I'll try to figure out a way to show you guys that in practice here when we get started. We got about 3 minutes left. So thanks, guys, for tuning in and joining us today. If you have any questions, now's the time. Hop on the chat. If you just want to say hi, I'd be happy to chat with you, answer any questions you guys might have. And we're just about ready to get started here. I've got a question down in the live chat. It's a poll. It just simply asks if you guys have ever had experience using AE expressions or expression controllers. I'd like to see if I can't get some of you guys to answer that question. I want to get an idea of what our knowledge level is here today. I don't want to move through this too slowly, and I don't want to move through it too quickly. All right, we got about 2 minutes left. I am going to just step away for just a moment, grab a quick bite, a quick drink, and I'll be right back. We'll get started right here, top of the hour. All right, ladies and gentlemen, again, welcome to the Creative Cloud Live training tutorial series here. My name is Levi Borland. I'll be your host today, and we are going to be taking a deep dive or a brushed overview, I guess I could say, of After Effects expressions and expression controllers. Now, what are AE expressions? I'll just give you guys a brief rundown, I guess, of what an expression is. An expression is essentially a way for you to expand on the capabilities of the software here. After Effects on the back end is pretty much written in a programming language called JavaScript. And so the way that object-oriented programming languages work is you essentially have three different things. You've got a class, and a class is essentially a description of a item or a feature. In object-oriented programming, say you were going to program something that represented a car, you would have a car class, okay? And each class is going to have those two other options. Those are your methods and your variables or your features. So a variable or a feature would be a value, right? So every car will have a color. Every car will have a 2-door or 4-door value. It will have a liter of its engine size. It'll have a odometer reading. It'll have the year it was made. Those are all values that you can assign to each instance of a car. Then you also have your methods, right? Your methods are actions. They're things that the car does. You start the car, you stop the car. You steer what left, you steer right. These are actions you can take with the car. And that's essentially what object-oriented programming language does, is you create essentially a blueprint, in this case for a car, and then you tell that blueprint, that instance, you can make multiple instances once you have that car blueprint. You essentially create different methods. Those are your actions, and you create different values or your variables. And it works the same exact way here in Adobe After Effects. An example of a class here in this particular example is this video clip that I've got here. This video clip belongs to a class, essentially referencing that it's a video file. This video file will have different values. Okay, so if I come in here, it's 630 by 315. Actually, nope. Excuse me. That is not the correct file. Reveal, and I will reveal this in the project. So this video file is it's 1920 by 1080. That would be an example of a variable representing its resolution. It's 15 frames per second. It's Apple ProRes 444XQ. Those are all essentially values. They're variables. If I drop down the transform controls, you have other variables here. There's a value set for the opacity, right? This video layer currently is 100%, visible. You have rotation, you've got scale, position, anchor point. And each type of effect you apply, and I'll just show you guys here, if I went to effect, and did a color correction, and say we just did a curves effect, right? Anytime you see one of these keyframe, these little stopwatch values, that means you can keyframe that over time. And essentially, there's a value assigned to this effect. This effect is adjusting this. And so an effect would be another example of a class, and it's got variables and it's got methods, right? You can adjust things. That would be an example of an action or a method. And so that's what we're using After Effects expressions for. Expressions are either a way for you to use pre-built methods, pre-built actions or controls that you've written into things. An example of that would be the wiggle, right? So if I were to alt-click here on position and type in wiggle and pass in a couple values, essentially what this will do is it will wiggle or shake our footage. In fact, I think I should probably make this 100. This will help illustrate that a little bit better, right? And so when you call a method, or when you write a method, you essentially tell the method what types of arguments it needs to take in and how many arguments. In this case, there's 2 arguments, and those types are going to be numbers, right? So the first number is how many times per second you want to change the value, and the second value in this case would be by how much do you want to change the value. In this case, I want to randomly adjust up or down by value of 100 based off its original position value. And so this would be an example of you passing those arguments into this method. This method is pre-written. It's something that After Effects has got written into it. It's written in JavaScript. And it's going to essentially take these 2 values, run them through a mathematical equation, And then five times every second, it's going to pass back a new value. In this case, the position value for X and Y. And so it seemingly creates random values. This would be an example that you guys are probably already very familiar with of using an expression. So what would an expression controller look like? Well, right now we've essentially keyframed the position using this wiggle tool. And so it's going to, if you look here, it's going to randomly adjust that value over time. But say I don't want it to just, go by that value. I can't come in here and change anything anymore. Okay, I guess I could. But what it's going to do essentially is be very difficult for you to make any adjustments here, because it's going to be taking the current value 5 times every second and changing it or adjusting it by 100. And so it's very difficult for you to keyframe here. And if you try to, it's going to cause issues. And so one example of what you could do to obfuscate this or make it more controllable, and this would be, let me get a different piece of footage here. I think you guys might get a better idea here if I found something a little different here. So I'm gonna, let me see here. You guys will definitely have to forgive my messy computer here. So this is a clip that you guys are probably familiar with. It's something I created with the product I made. I'm not gonna go any further into detail than that. But every time one of these fire blasts happen, say I wanna do a camera shake, right? A great way to do this is using that wiggle expression like I told you about. And so we'd go maybe about right here, right? This is right before the first expression, or excuse me, the first punch. So if I want to layer, and I just created a new, let's just make an adjustment layer. And we'll name this adjustment layer Wiggle Controller. I can essentially apply 2 different expression controls here. So what I'll do is I'll just do a slider control, and I'll make another slider control. And so what I'll name this first one, I'll just say times per second. Actually, we'll just call it frequency. All right, and wait for After Effects to save here. And I'll name the second one, we'll name it value, how much we're going to change it by, okay? So if I were to come here and go to the position keyframe or transform control and alt-click on it and just type in wiggle again, what I can essentially do, let me click out real quick. I want to click on the wiggle control layer, and I'm going to click this little toggle viewer lock button here, and that's going to essentially make it so that if I click away onto another layer, I'm still going to be able to see it and reference it. So on this wiggle value, remember we pass in 2 values, right? So what I'll do here is I'll take this pick whip and I'll pass it to this first frequency slider, okay? And then it's essentially telling After Effects that it needs to reference that slider, okay? Just make a little bit more room here so I can see better, so you guys can see better, okay? And then the, okay, and okay, all right. And then the next value that we're going to assign is going to be the value slider, all right? And then we'll close that off with a close bracket. So we've done the same thing here. Essentially, we've called wiggle, and inside that parentheses, you see we got the opening parentheses here and the closed parentheses here. We've got this first bit right here. This is the first value that we've passed. And in this case, it's referencing the expression controller here on the wiggle controller layer for frequency. Same thing for the value. After that comma sign, we've essentially got the next value. In this case, that value is just going to be replaced by whichever value we set here on the value After Effects controller, okay? So if I were to essentially start adjusting these, right, I can essentially set those values, and in this case, it's going to be wiggle 924, 218. I don't know if that makes sense for you guys, but we'll show this in practice here. What we'll do is we'll keyframe those, because now we have the ability to do real nice keyframing. Okay, so we've got no shake right here. We'll set keyframes at 0. We'll go down to about right here where the fire blast is at its height, and we will turn the frequency slider up to, let's say, about 10 times per second, and we'll take the slider value for the value, and we'll say we'll wiggle it by a value of 15, okay? And if I click on the wiggle controller here and hit U, that will bring up all of our keyframes, okay? And so you see here, we've got the first values that were set to 0, and then we've got our higher values, okay? And as that wiggle goes away, we can just shut these back to 0, and check out what happens. So no shake, and then there's a shake, and then the shake goes away. And so this is what you would use expression controllers for, essentially, is keyframing the values that you've written into your expressions. Now, expressions can be a little bit intimidating. I get it. It's essentially learning how to program. But it's a very, very light type of programming. You don't actually have to have a deep fundamental understanding of how software is, how it works or how it's written. But if you guys do have questions, or if you do get lost or concerned, by all means, just let me know. And so that's what you've got here. Essentially, just to recap, you've got 3 different things with object-oriented programming. You've got a class. In this case, that is the type of something, right? This is a adjustment layer. This is a piece of footage. You've got variables or values, right, that are unique to that type of footage or that type of item. So in this case, a piece of footage would have a resolution. It would have a position value, a scale value. And then you've got your methods or your actions, right? And these are when you make changes to it. You write in some code, you keyframe. When you keyframe, you're essentially programming in those values. All right, looks like we got a comment here. I would use indexes instead of the word slider to universalize it. Yeah, you can absolutely use indexes. I'll give you one great example of where I might use index here. If I took this blank clock and made a new composition with it, okay, and that is actually, let's just make a new comp, hit OK, and I'll pull this clock in here, I'll scale it up. If I made this a 3D layer, okay, and I wanted to make it 3-dimensional, essentially what I could do is on the position of this layer, if I alt-click on it, what I could do is I could essentially open up some brackets here. And, essentially when you have a position, you're either going to have a 2-field array. An array is essentially a list of values, in this case, an X and a Y value. Or you'll have a 3-value array, an X, a Y, and a Z. So in this case, what we can do is we can just say, hey, it's going to be 960 for the X. It's going to be 540 for the Y. And then I could say index for Z, okay? And what an index is it essentially references the place in line here in this layer. Okay, so you're going to see here that because this is the first item in our composition window, it's going to have an index now of 1. If I duplicated this, okay, you see here now that is the second layer, right? And so it has an index value of 2. And so if I kept duplicating it, it's going to change this Z value because the index has increased. So that would be a great way of using just a simple expression to do that. And what we're actually doing now, essentially, is we are, what I'll do here is I think I'll take this composition, I'll pull it into a new comp, okay? And if I click on this little rasterize thing and turn it into a 3D layer and rotate it, you're going to see here that we actually have sort of a 3-dimensional look. And so if I were to keep duplicating this, and then go back here, you guys are going to see here very quickly if I turn off the transparency that now we kind of have a 3-dimensional clock here going for us. Because essentially we've just duplicated it a bunch of times and set the index value, to essentially the Z position. And every time you add a new layer, it would just build it up and build it up. All right, so Joel says, I meant effect slider control 1 instead of effect slider control slider. This way I don't break with, okay, so essentially I think I understand what you mean. Essentially in this comp window here on this wiggle controller, you would essentially, instead of, essentially linking it to the slider here where it calls frequency, you would just reference the index value here in the effects panel. In this case, the frequency control is index value of 1, and the value would be index value of 2. I think that's what you mean. The thing that I don't like doing that for, I mean, I know it makes this much longer, kind of confusing code, is if for whatever reason you needed to change the order of any of these controllers, or you wanted to, go through and kind of reorganize things. Say you had a lot of different color controls for different layers, and you wanted to put all of the color controllers together, in one section here. If you were to start changing around the order here in the effects panel, what you would do is you would essentially break the connectivity between the layers. So for instance, if this was, index 1 and this was index 2, and I had those referenced to just the index values, if I were then to move this down, value would now be index 1 and frequency would now be index 2. And you'll see here when we get a little bit further into this training here today that we're going to be using a lot of different, controllers, and I will be kind of moving around and organizing it just to kind of make it as simple as I can for myself and for you guys. So all in all, just one last recap, and then we're going to get really into this. You have your classes. Is it footage? Is it an adjustment layer? Is it a solid? Is it an effect? Those describe what the item is that you're working with. You got your methods. The methods are essentially you keyframing or changing those values, adding action to them. And then, of course, your variables, those are the values that are assigned to any of those particular transform controls or, effects controls, things of that nature. So I'm going to tidy up here. We're going to go ahead and we'll delete this. Okay, we'll delete this. All right, we'll delete these two as well. And we'll just make a new composition. All right, so we're going to call this clock. All right. And, by no means is this something that's new or fresh. People have essentially created this exact type of tutorial, using clocks as the example. And I didn't know this until after I went and created this project template here a little while ago the other night. I went and just kind of checked out and, wanted to see if I was kind of following in terms of, what people were already out there offering. And I found a ton of tutorials that use clocks as an example. But I think they use it so many times because it is the simplest thing you can really think of to explain lots of these. Looks like Joel's back in the comments. Not the slider control effect, but the slider itself is always the first control of the effect because depending on the language of your AE, it won't be called the same. All right. I think I understand what you're saying. That being said, it just kind of depends on what your use case is for it. In this case, I do a lot of this stuff just for personal projects. If I find myself doing lots of things and there isn't a built-in effect or control or animation preset, I'll build one out for myself. So that's typically kind of, I think, what I want to kind of, let people know they could do. So we've got this clock here, and a couple different things here with the clock that we got going on. You've got some numbers. You've got this border around the outside edge, that has a color. You got the face of the clock, the back plate. And, I want to add some functionality to this, and this is a great way to kind of start showing you guys how this stuff works. I want to be able to change the colors of those three different things, all right? So essentially, what I would do here is I'm going to just rename this back plate. Okay, I'll duplicate it with Control-D, and I'll hit Enter to name the next one. I'll name this Numbers, okay, and Control-D, and I'll name this last one Border. In fact, I think I might put the border at the bottom, and I'll shut off these first two layers. And we're going to just go ahead and isolate this border. What I want to do is be able to change the control for the color, okay? So if I want to change this outer color, there's a couple different ways you could do that. If I just clicked on the border and I went to Effect, and I went to Color Correction, and shows Change to Color. This allows you to pick your starting color, and then pick your completed color, right? So you can essentially control the color here on this outside edge. And it's isolated in this way because the original color that we chose is only essentially visible on this outer edge. I think that's simple enough. The next thing I think I want to do here is I need to cut out just that outer edge, okay? So there's a real simple way to do that. I'm just going to make a mask here from the center. Holding down Shift while I click and drag will make a perfect circle. And then hitting the V key to go back to the selection tool I'll just kind of center this up. And if I hit M twice on the keyboard, that'll bring up all of our mask options. And I'm just going to pull the expansion in until it's a little bit tight around this center piece here, because this is what I'm going to use essentially just to kind of eyeball to make sure that it's centered on the clock. Once it's there, I'll just go ahead and push that value back up until it's just on the outside edge of our outer border. Something like that. If I then duplicate this mask, okay, and set the second one to subtract, I hit MM again, what I'll do is I will pull that expansion back, essentially creating a second mask. In this case, essentially what I've got, if I toggle the mask controls, is I've got two identical masks, but their expansion, or how far the mask borders push past the the line here. Essentially, your add subtract or your add mask is on the outside edge. That's essentially saying anything inside of that mask needs to be visible. And then we set a subtraction mask and moved it just a little bit smaller, saying essentially anything inside of that needs to be invisible. So we've essentially just isolated this outer edge. It's keyframing and rotoscoping 101, guys. I don't think I need to get too crazy with that. But as you guys see here, we've got the ability to change this outer edge now. Okay, so we'll leave that alone and we'll turn on the back plate next. And I will just go to the masks and I'm just going to copy them, Control C, and I'll paste them on our back plate now. And what I want to do is I will just go to our first mask, which was that outer mask, and I'll delete it. And then I will change mask 2 to add. All right, and then hit MM. And I'm just going to pull that in, as you guys can see here, until it's just inside this inner ring. Okay, and so now what I can essentially do here is, and a better way I think of doing this would just to make a mask, okay, or to make a solid. So we'll just do it that way. I think that's a better idea here. We'll make a new solid, and I'll just make it the same color as our back plate here. I'll make sure it's fit to comp size. And I'm just going to take that mask, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it onto this layer. Okay, and then I'll delete the back plate. And so now I can just scale this, this solid up until it fits just inside of that border. Now, you've got some options here. Essentially, if I went to Effect, solid settings here, transform, masks. I will go to Effect, I'll hit Generate, and I'll choose Fill. So I'm just going to fill this mask with a solid color here. And I'm just going to scale it down. And I'm going to click on our border, and I'm just going to change it to a different color, so it's a little easier for us to see. But I've essentially applied a fill effect here that has a color controller for this pale yellow solid, and this is just going to be clock face. And so now we can essentially make this, face any color that we want. So I'll just, make it kind of like an off shot yellow. All right. And then on the border, I'll make this, we'll make it purple. All right, that looks kind of cool. So we've got essentially 2 layers done so far. We've got the border, which is this outer edge. All right, and we've got that set to color of purple. And then we've got the clock face, which we've got set to, kind of like this tan color here. The last thing is going to be our numbers here. So if I turn our numbers layer on, what I will do is I will go to our border. I'll hit M. I'm just going to copy that second mask again, and I'm going to paste it on here. And I'll solo this here real quick. And I'll hit M. I'll turn it to add. Okay, and so this is essentially isolating just our numbers over their backplate. And so I'm just going to pull the mask expansion in just so I can get rid of this, this darker bit right here. So if I hit M twice, I'll just pull the expansion in until just our numbers are visible. And then I'll probably just do like a Luma key on it. So go to Effect, Obsolete, Luma key. I want to remove all the bright areas and leave just behind the text. So I'll key out the brighter, and I'll turn our threshold up a little bit until our numbers are visible still. This isn't the highest quality image, so it's going to be a little pixely. But if I shut off the solo layer, you guys can kind of see what we got going on here, where it's got a little bit of an eaten up edge. So I might go to Effect and apply a matte, and I'll just do a matte choker. And I will turn down that geometric softness. Actually, I'll probably turn it up a bit. I'll turn it up, and then I'll just pull the choke value in. Something to that effect. Just to kind of smooth out and round those edges. Something like that. And then I can do the same thing. I just go to Effect, and I could do Generate Fill. And that now fills in that isolated layer here with that color that we've got chosen. And so I will just make this black by default. But as you guys can see here, we've got 3 different color controls. We've got the outer edge, we've got the faceplate, and then we've got these numbers. All right. Now, why would I need to then obfuscate this all and put it onto one layer? Anytime I'd want to change any of these, if I had a big, crazy comp, and I'll show you an example of one of my previous comps here. If I went to like comp 3, you guys see, actually, no, let's yeah, this is probably a better example. So here's an example of one of my pre-comps, for essentially putting together, this video presentation. And you guys see in each of these nested comps, we've essentially got, some busy compositions here with lots of different layers in them, right? And each of these layers has got, different effects applied to them. And there's several different instances, where these files reference, a color value of some kind. If I were to essentially need to go and dig around through all of these nested compositions here in efforts just to find the layers where I had those fill effects and things like that applied, very quickly I would find myself spending 20 minutes at a time going through, digging around, trying to find the correct layer that's in the right comp and find the correct effect on that layer in order to make those changes. I don't want to have to do that. So instead, I'm just going to put all of the controls I care about onto a single layer. So we'll do what we did before. I'll just make a new adjustment layer here right quick. And I'll just name this Clock Controls. Just to kind of keep things organized. I might change the color of this. Right click here. Right here, sorry. I'll make this like a green color, I think. Green. And then all of these layers, because they are clock, I'll make them blue. Okay, so all of our clock layers are blue. Our clock control layer is green. If I go to the effects controls here for the clock control adjustment layer, you can see here that there's no effects applied. So I'll start out by just applying 3 different color controllers. So I'll go to expression controls, and I'll come down to our color control. I'll hit Control D and Control D once more. And there we are. And so what we might do here is just rename these. And I think this is what Joel meant, was naming these with just like a number value rather than an English word value. That way, if somebody opened this up in a different version of After Effects, things matched up. But this first one, I'm going to call this number color. Okay, and then the second one, I will have back plate or back face color. And this last one here, we will do border, clock border. I'm just going to name them because this is a project I'm making for myself. I don't really need to worry about making sure somebody else can use it. All right, so how do we connect these? It's actually very simple. What we'll do is we'll go to the border color first. In fact, actually, inside your clock controls, we're going to click this little lock button here again, so that if we click away onto another layer, it stays with this effects panel open for the clock controls. And this allows us to click and drag and connect things to these controls. So the border color, right? If you drop down your effects, we're going to have the change to color effect here. And we've got this 2 color value. I'm just gonna make it match here real quick, okay? And then what I'm gonna do is I'm essentially gonna alt click here on the border, change to color to value, alt click, and it's gonna have the highlighted value here. If I click and drag this to the color value of our clock border color, and then click away, this is now going to essentially match whatever this value is. So if I change this to a red color and hit OK, you'll see here that it changes red, and it's changed red over here. All right, so let's repeat that step. Clock face. I'm going to go to the effects, fill, and here's our fill value. So I'm just going to make it match here real quick. And then I'm just going to alt click on color and then pick whip it to that value. All right, so if I change this to something else, you guys can see here, I now have that control. So I'll just leave it kind of that offshot pale color. And last but not least, our numbers layer, right? This is the color of our numbers. What I'll do is I will just go to the effects. I'll find that fill effect that I applied. And then I'm just gonna pick whip it. So I'll alt click on color and then pick whip it here. And then click away, it should now turn them red, but I'll just simply put them back to black. All right, so how does this save us time, right? This is the whole point of this is just to save time. We've got 3 different layers here that make up our clock, okay? And each of those essentially are going to have a different color value assigned to them. And so if I wanted to change the colors, I'd have to like go and drill down, or if I had a bunch of effects on each of these layers selected, I'd essentially have to like look through a bunch of effects in order to find the value I'm looking for. And I have to do that each and every time, or for each and every part of the clock that I want to control. And so now, essentially, I've put that all on one control layer. So I only have to go to this one layer, and I can keyframe these values. I can easily control all of the values that I obfuscate here, all very quickly, very easily. So an example of that, again, if I want to make that border color, say that blue color that we started with, and say I want to make the back face color, I want to make it kind of a offshot blue, kind of like a nice light teal blue. And then I'll make the colors kind of like a teal that's dark, right? So we're essentially kind of getting things that match, okay? We've got kind of a color design here going for us. All right, what else can we do? Let's think about the scale of our clock, right? So each of these have their own independent scale. So if I were to just scale one up, you see it breaks our design, okay? So I think I'm gonna have the border layer here have the control for the scale. So if I clicked on numbers and I hit the S key and I clicked on our border, in fact, let's just do it for all 3 of these layers. I want these values to follow the scale value here. So under scale, what I can do is just pick with this, our numbers layer, to essentially scale up or down with the border. Same thing here, to scale up or down. So now if I scale our I think the problem here is that our clock face isn't the same size as the rest of our composition here. Strangely enough. Just going to try it one more time, and if it doesn't work, then I would just pre-comp it. Well, this is very strange. So our number and our border do just fine. It's just this clock face that's having some trouble here. And I think it's really just because I have it as a solid and it's not essentially the same original dimensions here. And also the scale is already set to 355. So I think that might be part of the problem as well. So what we might do here, let me just go to layer, pre-compose. All right, and I will move all attributes into a new comp. And I'll double click into it. I'm just going to extrapolate out the effect. So I'll just go to reveal, actually no, it's going to be open the effects controls. I'm going to hit Control X. I'll come back over into this layer and I'll just apply it on here. Let's try it now. Let's see if it works now. Scale, border. There we go. So just pre-comping it, moving the effect from inside the comp to outside the comp took care of that for us. And so now, essentially, we only have to control the scale for this border value, and it's going to automatically scale up the others as well so that they stay consistent. So you don't have to essentially change the scale on each different one and make them match and be doing a bunch of complicated keyframing. So if I go back to my control, clock controls here, what I'll do here is I'll make a new, I'll apply a new effect, and it'll be an expression control, and I'll apply a slider control, okay? And this slider control here is going to essentially give us the ability to adjust a scale, okay? So right now it's got a value of 0, but if I go to the scale value here for our border, and I alt-click on it and pick whip it to have the value of our slider, and then click away, it's now going to apply a 0, 0 here because our slider has a 0 value. So what I can do is I can just go to a temp and I can add 100 and then add 100. So I'll explain what this has done here. Essentially, it's created a temp value that is being assigned to our scale. Okay, this is a variable. And that is going to be equal to this comp, right, the composition that we're in, dot layer, meaning it's referencing a specific layer, clock controls, which is this clock control here. And then there's a period referencing essentially that layer control has an effect. That effect is a slider control, and it is called slider, okay? And then essentially what it's doing is taking and creating a 2-value array here and referencing it to this slider control. And so then it's returning an array, 2 values, an X and a Y, or excuse me, yeah, an X scale and a Y scale. And so in this case, it's 0, but then when I add 100, it's going to put it back to 100%. Okay, so this is 100%. This is the original size of that layer. And so now when I scale this up, it respects that. And we'll rename this layer. We'll just name it scale. All right. And we're just going to have to re-link it. And I'll add that 100 back in. So the only unfortunate thing here with the way that I'm doing this is that I can only really scale between 0 and 100 here, okay? And that's essentially an issue because I'm clamped, right? I can't make it 1,000. Actually, I guess I could. If you got 0 and 100 here on the slider, but if you just go to this number value, you can scale it up as big as you want. I tricked myself. All right, so I'm going to scale this up, make it kind of centered in our comp like we once were, and get continued on. So we've essentially taken the scale values of these 2 layers. We've connected them here to our border layer. All right, our border layer is attached to the scale value here in our clock controls layer, and this allows us to scale up the entire clock, its face, its numbers, and its border all together. And of course, again, we also have the ability to go and start changing the colors of these different layers because they have effects that reference color values, and I'm pointing them over here. It's a pretty neat thing to have, essentially it allows us to give full control to ourselves. Okay, so we got scale. What's next? What do we need? Let's think about rotation, right? We have a angle controller that we can start playing with. And this is where things are going to kind of get fun, and math is going to start becoming an issue for us. So what we need to do is create a couple clock hands, okay? So to do that, I'll go to layer and I'll make a new shape layer, okay? And we'll just fill it with a red color. Not sure why I can't see it quite yet, but we'll go to transform. Oh, for contents, what we need to do is we need to add a rectangle. All right. Control Z here. Yeah. Okay. So we'll manually draw it here with our rectangle tool. And so now we have rectangle 1 here in our shape layer. What I will then do is go to fill. Okay, we've got a fill color, right? So that's great to have. We'll be using that later. We'll add another control here. In fact, actually, you know what we might do is just have it match our color value. So Alt click, and we'll pick whip it to the color of our number controls. And when I click away, see now it's going to match the numbers that we have. For the path, we've got our size. What we'll do is we'll zoom in here, and I'll make it skinny, and I'll make it a little bit shorter. Alrighty. We might also want to, let's see here, we'll turn up the roundness, okay, so that we can have a nice round shape to it. All right. Don't need to mess with the stroke. That's the outer edge. We've got our fill already. We have some transform controls. We've got rotation, okay. So right now it rotates off this center area. So what we can do is we can adjust the Y anchor point to essentially put the anchor point here on the end so that when we rotate now, it's going to rotate around that center part. And so now we've got kind of a clock hand going for us. So just going to pull all that up here. And I'm going to move it over here so that it's on our clock. I'm going to just turn the opacity down here for a second so I can make sure that it's centered up. Go to contents, rectangle 1. We've got stroke 1. We will just delete the stroke, okay, so that we don't have it. We'll go to the transform. We'll get that anchor point. And really, we just want to make sure that this lines up center with this dot here in the middle. And then I'll just turn the opacity back up. And we've got ourselves a clock hand here. And probably don't want it to have or be the same color, actually. And so what we'll probably do is just go back to the contents, rectangle 1. We'll go to fill. And we'll just we'll make it black for now. And I'm actually just going to have to double click and delete this value here. And let's make it a little taller. This will be our minute hand, I think. So we'll bump up the size here. And then we need to do what we did before with the anchor point. Just kind of shift that up until it's kind of center of the circle here. Turn the opacity down. All right, perfect. It's still centered on that point. Excellent. And so again, you know, essentially under the contents, we've got rectangle 1 here. And we've got our transform for rectangle 1. We've got the rotation control, so we can rotate this. All right. Excellent. So we've got one hand down, so to speak. All right. So I'll leave the opacity turned down on that, and I'm going to rename this shape layer. I'll just name it, we'll name it, this looks like a minute hand. All right, so we'll name it minute hand. We'll duplicate this now, and we'll name this one hour hand. Okay. And we got to, you know, just transform it a little bit. So first thing we'll do is change the fill color. We'll make it like a teal blue here. turn the opacity back up. And then we will, under rectangle 1, we will turn the Y value down, make it a little bit shorter. We've got to go to the anchor point here and adjust that now. We're just going to adjust it till it's essentially centered there. Oh, that was position. I apologize. We're just going to shift it down until it matches. And that is under anchor point. We're just taking the Y value down. Okay. And same thing here now. We essentially have got a rotatable hour hand. Pretty neat. All right, so we've got a hour hand. We've got a minute hand. What do we need next? We need a second hand. I'll duplicate this and just type second hand. Okay, and rectangle 1 here, what I want to do is we want to make the size a little skinnier and we want to make it longer. Say about right there. We'll turn it red for sanity's sake here. Our anchor point's still in the same position, so we just have to take our position and slide it up. Something like that looks good. And I'll move the second hand all the way to the bottom. I'll turn the opacities all back up to 100. And we've got 3 different layers here. We've got our hour hand, our minute hand, and our second hand. And they're all pointed straight noon, right at that 0 degree angle. So here comes the fun part. We need to do a little bit of math, all right? Let's take a look at how long our composition here is. Our composition looks like it's almost 5 minutes. So we're going to just adjust this. We're going to go to composition settings, and we're just going to change it to 5 minutes even. Whoop. And we're going to make a 5-minute clock. I'm going to take all these layers. I'm going to go to the very end. I'm just going to hit Alt-End, which will stretch them out there. I need to make this composition longer as well. I made it longer than 5 minutes just for time's sake, but that's fine. Also need to just pull our clock face out. There we go. All right. So, math. Math is fun, right? Let's look at our hour hand. Okay. Actually, let's just look at our second hand. We've got 5 minutes on the clock, right? So what we need to do is figure out how many times each minute. Let me see here. Let's go to that rotation. I want to make sure I explain this well enough. So under the transform tools, we've got our rotation control, and it's essentially 0 through 360 degrees. And once it hits 360, it turns to 1, and then 2, and then 3, so on and so forth. And so we know that each minute, this needs to go around, okay? So that's essentially going to be an expression that we can use here. If I Alt-click on rotation, all right, and I typed time, okay, time essentially is a expression that references what the time is on our timeline, like how many frames it is, all right? If I multiply this by 360, let's see what that does for us. Ooh, it gets a little bit crazy. All right. So essentially what that's doing is over the time, each time a new frame value comes into play, it's essentially kind of like indexing. It's using that that number, and we're multiplying it by 360 here. We don't need to do that necessarily. I'm trying to remember how I did this exactly. sure somebody in the comments is going to jump in there and yell at me about it, but that's fine. Okay, I remember now. All right, so essentially it's 360 times 5. Okay, so we'll pull out the calculator. So we got 360 times 5 is 1800. You know, I really wish I would have paid more attention to how I did this before. I'm going to just do a little bit of cheating here, because I can't remember if I started from the hour or if I started from the second. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to figure out a way to get that second hand or that hour hand spinning. And then we're going to use the value of how it's spinning and extrapolate that out onto the minute and the second hand, so that as each of these move around, they move around just like a clock would and keep accurate time. So I think it's this layer right here. It sure is. So if I hit EE, we're going to start Control C. We're going to start on that hour hand, because I think that's where I had actually started. We'll go to the transform rectangle 1. We'll alt click on rotation and we'll paste that in. So here's what it is. So we're transforming the rotation. So whatever that rotation value is, we're going to add time divided by 3600 divided by 360, and then divide that by 12. And so what this is essentially is there is 3600 seconds, I believe in an hour's time. We divide that by 360, right, which gives us how many times essentially over that hour that it rotates 360 degrees. And then we divide that by 12 to get 1 hour time. And so as you guys see here, about 5 minutes has passed on that clock. Okay. And this will make more sense once we get into the minute hand now. So we don't even need to do much more expression typing here to get that point. What we'll do is we'll go to the minute hand. We'll go down to contents, rectangle 1, and the transform, and we'll alt click on the rotation here, and we're going to pick whip it. Oops. We're going to pick whip it to this other rotation control for the hour hand. Okay. But then we need to do a tad bit of math. So this comp layer, hour hand, content, rectangle 1, transform, rotation. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put all of this inside of, if you guys remember orders of operation, PEMDAS, right? Parentheses first, right? And then exponents, and then multiplication, and then division, and then addition, and then subtraction. So we're solving everything that's inside of this first. In this case, we're taking the value, of this other bit here. But guess what? We've got an hour. In 1 hour, the hour hand does a 360-degree revolution. But the minute hand does 360 degrees 60 times, right? So what we'll do is we'll multiply this by 60. So now, if I go to our hour hand, all right, and I start adjusting that rotation, which I can't actually show you because I don't have a slider controller to it. We're just going to have to go forward in the timeline. So you guys see as this minute hand rotates, it's rotating a bit faster than our hour hand is. And by the time it would make its way all the way back around, the hour hand would be just a little bit forward. All right, so we're going to do the same thing now for that second hand, okay? So if I go to the rectangle path and I find the transform for rectangle, I alt click on the rotation, And I'm going to pick whip it now. Make us some room here. We're going to connect it to the rotation of our minute hand. But how many times does that second hand go around every time the minute hand goes around? Well, I believe it's 60 again, right? I don't think I got my math exactly right. We'll find out here in a minute. There we go. So every time that goes around, by the time it goes around the 5th time, okay, our minute hand is on the 1 5 minutes later, and 10, and so on and so forth. And I have the terrible feeling the math isn't perfectly correct. But here's kind of what we've got so far. We've got our second hand going by. And it's moving our minute hand. And our hour hand starts to slowly move. There we go. I have a feeling here. Let me go to like 120 frames a second here. Yeah, our hour hand is definitely not right. You know, I was feeling so proud of myself the other day. We got DJ Fist saying this looks complicated, but it's so cool. It's really, we're at kind of like the hardest part right here. Essentially, it's just trying to kind of figure this stuff out. I guess the reason why I got this kind of screwy is because we're only on a 5-minute composition here. I think that's probably part of the reason. But if we start with this hour hand again, we're rotating it. It's got to rotate in 5 minutes. All right, let's just do ourselves a favor here. We're going to go to composition settings. We're going to change this to an hour. Okay. And this will help me out actually quite a bit. So we're going to, come on now. Extend these out. Come in here. We'll do the same thing. Composition settings. Oh, cancel. All right. No, it looks like it's good. We actually got the math right. In 1 hour's time, the hour hand goes to the 1. Looking snazzy. I think we're okay there. All right. Yeah, I'm really hating the color of this this hour hand here. That's a little bit better. All right, so our hour hand is definitely good, right? It moves perfectly to the 1. Our minute hand, however, does not. Because when I go to 5 minutes, it's like pretty much down here at 20. Okay, so we definitely have got something wrong with the minute hand. So we need to fix that. Okay, so I think we just need to multiply it by 12. Let's try that. Yep, there we go. Perfect. And then it makes its way all the way back around. And let's see what we got here. Just running out a little preview. You know, there is like some pretty obnoxious sounds coming outside the building here. Sounds like an alarm or something's going off. Yeah, I think we're good. So I'm going to recap that math with you guys real quick, and then I'm going to show you something real neat. But essentially, if I just kind of pull our timeline in here, you're going to see here that 1 minute hand, by the time we get to 1 minute on our timeline, that second hand will make its way all the way back around. And our minute hand will be at about the 1 minute mark. Okay. By the time we get to 2, it makes its way around one more time, then 3, and then 4, and then 5. Right? So here, it's at 5. But then if we move our way all the way through, boom, there we are. We got 1 hour. All right, so I want to show you guys something cool here. This doesn't work the way a clock works, right? What I need to do is go into our composition settings, and I'm going to change this from 30 frames per second to just 1 frame per second. And then I'll change our frame rate to auto, which will make it match our composition. So now essentially it's only going to update every second. And so if I render out a preview here, it's now going to make it look like our 1 minute hand is ticking just like a normal clock would. Because essentially what I'm telling it is, hey, listen, I only want 1 frame every second, not 30. So it's not as smooth now. It essentially is just going to go around a single frame in a second. And so I'll just let that play back. Come on now. There we go. There we go. We've got a ticking clock here. It's pretty neat. Okay, so math. I said we get to the math because this is a little bit confusing. I think what I need to do here is I'm going to go ahead and go to edit, and I'm going to purge all the memory and disk cache. I got about 50 gigabytes worth of disk cache data there. It's going a little slow. Looking at the poll, we've got looks like about 70% of you guys have had some experience using After Effects expressions and controls. That's pretty awesome. But our math, our hour hand, let's start there. Okay, so if I look at this rotation control here, essentially what I've said is over time, what I wanted to do is divide the time, right? How much time has passed? So like an hour. I want to divide that by 3,600 because that's how many times, essentially, in an hour. Excuse me. Goodness. All right. Let me just pull out the calculator here. This made so much sense to me the other day. All right, folks, just bear with me here. There is this weird alarm thing. It just keeps going off. I just want to make sure that everything's all right outside. I will be right back. Well, I'm not entirely sure where that noise is coming from. I do apologize, guys, but we're going to figure it out anyway. All right, so 9 to 6. We're about an hour in. Got about an hour left. I don't want to make this terribly long, but I figured it out. All right. So in 1 hour at 1 frame per second, we've got 3,599 frames, 3,600 frames, okay? So essentially I want to take the time, right? The entire length. So every time 1 frame passes, that would be 0 and then 1, all the way up to 3,600. We'll divide that by 360 because there are, guess what? A 360-degree rotation that's needed in 1 hour's time in order for it to get through. And then we'll divide that by 12 because it's, essentially you've got 12-hour marks on a clock, right? So one 360-degree turn. If I didn't divide it by 12, it's going to spin 12 times around. So I got to divide it by 12 so it only spins that one time because we're working with an hour here. That's where the math was confusing me. But I figured that. So, for example, if I were to not divide this by 12, in the hour's time, I think I still need to, yep. All right. It's going to essentially make its way all the way around to 12 full hours. Okay. So I needed to divide it by 12 so that it would only spin 1/12 of the time, or in other words, 1 hour. Okay. So then for our minute hand, I took that value, whatever it was, and I times it by 12 because in 1 hour's time, that minute hand is going to pass 12 numbers. Okay, simple enough. And then for our second hand, we've got times 60, and it's referencing that minute hand because essentially, for that minute hand to make it all the way around, okay, there's 60 seconds each minute. So you got to multiply it by 60, or in this case, 60 seconds. Simple enough, I think. All right, so I'm just going to go to composition settings here. There's something bugging me. I'm just going to add 1 frame to the end of this comp. Excuse me, 1 minute, I should say, to the end of the comp. All right, folks, this is really loud. I want to make sure it's not my alarm system, so I'll just be right back. I do apologize. 1 moment. All right, figured it out. It was indeed my alarm system. I guess one of the sensors on the doors probably ran out of batteries or something along those lines. No worries. All right, so check it out, guys. Because we set the frames to 1 second, we essentially said, hey, there's 3,600 frames in 1 hour here at 1 frame per second. So we essentially need our hour hand to essentially spin not 3,600 times. We divide that by 360 because 3,600 times for an hour or for the frames. Divide that by 12 because there's 12 hours on the clock. And then essentially that allows us to only just move the 1 hour. And then our minute hand, we're going to essentially divide that by 12 because, by 60 because, essentially that minute hand has to move 60 minutes in order for that hand to go through. And then, we divide that second hand by 60 because 60 seconds for every 1 minute. And so that's kind of very lackadaisical. I do apologize. I'll probably break that down a little bit easier for you, or in the comment section, I'll probably go ahead and post those expressions for you. But here we are. Essentially, we've got a clock that's rotating. Now, back to the controller portions of this, all right? Simple enough. What we want to do is just kind of go ahead and keep our design going. So what we'll do here is we'll go back to our clock controls. I'm going to move it to the top. And I will just go to our effects controls. All right. And we will go to effect, and we'll choose expression controls, and I will do another color control, and I'll duplicate that twice. All right, so we've got our second hand color. We've got our minute hand. Color. And last but not least, our hour hand color. All right, and so if we go down into our second hand, there's that fill. Okay, we're going to just alt click on it, pick whip it to our second hand. In this case, it was already red, so we're good to go there. I'm going to change our minute hand to be black here, and I'm going to change our hour hand to be kind of like a real cool navy blue, I think. And then we'll go ahead and pick whip those values. So under color for our minute hand, alt click and drag, bam. And then for our fill on our hour hand, alt click, and then we will click and drag here. All right, so we've written some expressions to control the rotation of our clock hands. We have got various different expression controllers here that we've written expressions essentially to connect to, or actually just pick whip it, which makes it actually a lot simpler. So if I, just show you here, we can essentially, for those just tuning in, we can now change the color of our second hand. We can change the color of our minute hand, to whatever color we want. And same thing with our hour hand. We can make that whatever color we want. And why does this save us time? Again, essentially all of these color controls so far are right here directly on this one clock control layer, rather than me having to sit there and go and toggle down and then go to contents, rectangle. This is messy. I gotta pull some stuff up. No, there it is. Fill. Okay, color. There it is. Right. I'd have to do that, and toggle this all back up, and then come in here and do it again. Or I can hit U or E. If I hit EE twice, that'll bring up all the expressions that we have written here. That's one way of getting to it, but we don't need to do that essentially because we can just come here, up, second hand color, boom. It's all right here. It's nice and organized on this one layer. So that's real neat. Let me see here. I got to. Let's make that a little bit bigger so it fills. What can we do next? What else is there? All right. Go to layer, new, solid. Okay. Layer, solid settings. Make this just a little bit darker than our hand. I'm just gonna make like a little circle. All right. Now the anchor point isn't centered, but if I hit Control Alt Home, oh, Control Alt Home, it will center that for us. I'll lower the opacity. It's looking good. That's essentially just created like a nice little cover, you know, for all of our hands there. We'll just name this center button, and I'll just stick it underneath our clock controls. I'll hide it, which we can start doing just to kind of clean things up. All right, very neat. Now, one thing that we can also do here, I talked about angle control, right? So if I went to Effect with our clock control selected and went to our expression controls and I found angle control, all right? If I were to go to the hour hand here and just go to the transform, actually I just hit EE, and I just clicked in here and I get rid of that expression, right, for controlling the angle. And then I alt clicked on it and then pick whipped it to this angle controller. I can now control that hour hand's rotation, you know, with this angle controller, which is quite handy. We can also just go ahead and essentially control the rotation of our entire clock if we wanted to. We can rotate the numbers if we wanted to. There's lots of different things you can do with the angle controller, but let's just go ahead here. I want to start digging into some other ideas. So let's go to the expression controls. Let's look at checkbox control. Checkbox controls are freaking awesome, guys. They're an on-off switch, essentially. If you were to look at this as object-oriented, a checkbox is what? It is a checkbox controller, and it has a what? It has a value. It's 0 or 1. 0 is the value it has right now because it's off, okay? If I were to check it on, it now has a value of 1. So it's 0 or 1. It's binary, the same way as like a true or false, or on or off, or yes or no. It's used in decision-making processes, okay? So, for instance, if I wanted to, let's see here. I have an idea. What we'll do is we'll come here to the checkbox control. I'm just going to rename it Is Clock Running? Okay. So it's a question. Is the clock running? Yes or no? Okay. Right now it says yes, it's running. Right here it says no, it's not running. So how do we make the clock actually stop when we check that box off? Well, it's really easy, actually. If we go to our hour hand, okay, and we drop back down to that rotation, I'll just hit EE and find our rotation, okay? We can write what's called an if statement, okay? If statements are essentially statements that check to see if a certain value is true, and if it is, you'll do one thing, and if it's not, you'll do something else, okay? So in this case, I'm going to say if, put in parentheses, all right, if this checkbox, all right, is equal, and you got to use two equal signs, okay? So these are operanders. In coding, you've got two different options here. Two equal signs essentially is what you use when you're comparing two values. Is 1 equal to, with two equal signs, to 1? Well, that would return true because 1 is equal to 1. When you assign a value, you just use a single value sign. So I can say rotation is equal to 5, right? And that would assign 5 to the rotation value. So we got to make sure that we use two equal signs because we're checking to see if this comp layer, right, if this checkbox, if it's equal to 1, okay, space. Then you open up these little tilde bracket things, okay, this thing right here. If it's equal to 1, then we do what's inside of this, okay, else, okay, we do what's inside of that. That makes sense. So if this value is true, if this equals 1, then we're going to essentially oh, gosh darn it. Alrighty, what did I do? My timeline disappeared. Just go to default. All right. EE. We're in the wrong comp. All right. All right. All right. If, oh lordy. All right. So, sorry. All right. So if this checkbox is equal to 1, all right, equal to 1 with two equal signs, then we're going to perform what is inside of that bracket, else. So if not, we're going to do that. Okay, so inside this one, what we'll do is we're just going to copy this original control, Control X, and I'm going to paste it here inside there. So essentially saying if that checkbox is equal to, if it's equal to 1, then we're going to do what we were already doing. Otherwise, we're just going to take the original value of the rotation. Okay, so essentially, we had a expression written on this rotation control that did something. We just put that inside of an if statement. So if the checkbox is equal to 1, we want to do that thing. Okay. Otherwise, we just want to take the default value of the rotation control and use that instead. And I got a. All right. If it's equal to 1, I think I need to do that. There we go. All right, so let's look at this code again. So if it's equal to 1, all right, really just want to give you guys more room. All right, so we're going to use tabbing. So if this comps layer clock controls, if the effect is clock running, checkbox is equal to 1, meaning it's checked, then we are going to perform this next function, right, which is right here. Okay, else, if it's not, then we're going to perform. In fact, I can just drop that down to its next line. We're going to perform this function, which is just taking the value of the rotation. Now, the rotation has a default value, okay? This first expression that we wrote earlier to make everything rotate changes that value. If we don't actually do that value or execute this code, right? If this value is not equal to 1, it's going to skip this line of code. And instead, it's going to go to this else line, and it's going to essentially just apply its default value. So right now, our clock is running, okay? If I were to just, let's say, check the checkbox control to shut it off, the clock is no longer running, guys, okay? Because it's just going to take whatever that default value was, okay? And in this case, what we can do is we can just set that default to, let's try 0, 0. Let's try it like that. Oh. Aha. So we're just going to set the default to 0. So 0 just means no rotation. If I were to check is clock running again and move forward, the clock will run. If I uncheck it, it just puts us back to 0. Pretty simple. Essentially, it's just an if statement. Now, let's do a simpler if statement here. Let's create a checkbox controller that controls whether the is clock running checkbox has that value. Okay, so we're just going to make a new expression control, checkbox control, and I'll rename this checkbox control our battery's dead. Okay, so are the batteries dead? Yes or no? Okay, if they are dead, then the answer is yes. We'll have a value of 1. If they're not dead, then it's 0. Okay, so we'll actually write the expression here on the clock control layer for a change. So if I double click on our battery's dead, it will bring up that checkbox control. And you see it's got an off and an on right here. If I alt click on it, I can essentially say if, do parentheses, if is, actually, I apologize. We want to do it on the is clock running. Okay, so what we're going to do is alt-click on is clock running. We're going to say if, right? If our battery's dead is equal to 1, meaning the batteries are dead, right? And we'll close that off with the close parentheses. Then we are going to set the value here. So if it is dead, then is clock running will have a value of 0. Okay? Else, we will set the value to 1. Okay? And I'll break down what that means. And I got to make sure I use the correct symbol there. Okay, so if our battery's dead's checkbox is equal to 1, meaning the batteries are dead, the answer is yes, then essentially is clock's running checkbox should have a value of 0, else it should have a value of 1. I think that's simple enough, okay? Except I keep deleting things. There we go. All right, so our clock is running, okay? Because the batteries are not dead. It's unchecked, meaning 0. If I check this box, it's now going to uncheck this box. You see, guys, how we can easily essentially check the value of another checkbox to control the value that it's checking against. So our battery's dead? Yes, the clock's not running. Simple enough. You know, are batteries dead now? No, they're not. So the clock is running. And so now we've got a running clock. All right, and I think for those just tuning in, essentially, we've got our clock is just ticking a second at a time. We're going at 1 frame per second. There we go. So in this case, essentially, if the batteries are dead, yes, the batteries are dead, then our clock will stop running. It's clock running. It's now a value of 0, in this case 1, and so then it, essentially checks this line of code here that we wrote, this expression, and goes ahead and runs the else statement, which essentially says to take whatever rotation value it had and to leave it be. All right, so for that being said, let's look back at that hour hand. I go back to the rotation of our rectangle, okay? Let's add a rotation controller. So instead of having a value of 0, what we'll do is we'll just have a rotation controller that it references. So if I go to our clock controls and I go to Effect, and I go to Expression Controls, and I go to Angle Control, and we'll just call this hour hand rotation, or we could call it start time. Okay, where do we want it the hour hand to actually start? What we can do here is instead of having it just if the is clock running is a no, instead of it saying 0, we'll want it to instead reference the angle control here, which right now is 0. Okay, so if I were to say, yep, the batteries are dead, all right, so we got the clock running, the batteries aren't dead. If I make the batteries dead, that will shut off the is clock running. I could then manually rotate our hour controller, which will make our stuff do its thing. Now, I'm not sure why the minute hand here, the second hand, EE, whatever reason, the second hand runs fine by referencing, our second hand runs fine by referencing our minute hand. It does not, however, once we shut off the batteries dead. It just defaults it back to a 0 value, which is kind of strange in a sense. All right, I'm not even going to dig too deep into that. We've got a working clock at the moment, guys. All right, so what else can we do here? We've got the angle controller that we can use to control the start time. In fact, I think it might actually be useful for when the batteries aren't dead and the clock is running. What we can do here is if I just reset this to 0 here for the start time and I go to our hour hand and I hit EE twice to bring up this control. If the clock is running is equal to 1, transform the rotation, time divided by 3/6, blah, blah, blah. What I can do is probably hit plus and pick whip. We want to take that value, okay, we want to just add rotational control of our start time angle, okay? And so essentially, it will start at 0, but if I wanted it to instead start at like 6 o'clock, I could just set this whole number to 6 probably. No. I can just say 6 times 360. Oh, what the heck? Oh. Oh, my apologies. It's out of 360 degrees, so 180 would make it right there for us. So batteries aren't dead, clock is running, but now we will start at the 6 o'clock hour. Okay, so this allows us to essentially, the ankle control actually pretty much looks just like a clock in the sense. The hour control is down there. We're now starting at 6 o'clock instead of 12 o'clock. If we did 280, right, we would start somewhere a little bit past 9. The batteries are dead. Nothing moves. The batteries aren't dead. We'll move. And now the second hand works just fine. I don't know what I was thinking. The reason why I wasn't thinking it did anything is because we're on the very first frame, right? So it's always going to start right there at the top. I mean, it's just by default. But we can essentially, start our clock wherever we want. But I'll leave the batteries are dead to off. And we've got just our basic animation that our clock has. All right. Looking good. All right, what other kind of controllers are there? We've done slider control. We've done, we haven't done drop-down menu control. All right, let's do drop-down menu control. It's pretty easy. Drop-down menu allows you to select different options, okay? So you can essentially create animation presets in a sense like this. What options might we have? Okay, I think we'll do clock, color, design. Okay, and we've got different items here. We'll just go to edit, and I'll make the first one kind of like a default description. So choose color, design. Okay. Second one would be red, and then we can do green. We'll add a blue. Okay, and we'll hit OK. So this this drop-down control works very similarly to our checkbox controls, right? Our checkbox controls have a value of 0 or 1. They're kind of indexed. It's the same exact concept here for our color or our drop down control here. Essentially, the very first value is an index of 1, and then 2, 3, and 4. So if we write if statements, we can say if the value is 1, if the value is 2, if the value is 3, so on and so forth. So what we could do here is go to our number colors, our backface colors, our clock colors, and we'll leave the hour hand colors the same except for the hour hand, okay? So we've got these 4 color options, okay? And right now they kind of have like a blue theme, right? With our clock color design, what I can essentially say is if I alt-clicked on the number color, alt-click, what I can say is if this checkbox controller is equal to 1, okay, meaning if it is this first option, then we will essentially carry our default value, right? In this case, blue. Else, okay, if otherwise, actually, we're not even going to do a else, we're going to do else if, okay? So this allows us to do more than one option. So if it's equal to 1, do the default color. Else, or in other words, if it's not that and it's instead that it's equal to 2, then what we'll do, 2 in this case is red, all right? We'll say that this color will be equal to, let's see if I can copy, cancel. Let's see if it'll let me Control V. See if it just lets me do a hashtag or not. And we're assigning a value, so we only need to use a single equal sign. Else, if all else fails, we'll leave it its default value. All right, so if I make this red, let's see here. Invalid left-hand side assignment. Okay, it's because I used double equal if blah, 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 blah. Okay, else if it's equal to 2. Sometimes it works better if you do this in some sort of code editor. All right, error at line 1, property color, dot layer 1, clock controls, and clock reference error, invalid left hand side in assignment. Okay, I think what I need to do is say that its color will be equal to the default. Let's clean this up. Start that all over again. I'm kind of making this on the fly, guys, so I do apologize if it's feeling a bit slow. Better idea. Better idea. Let's delete that. Okay, let's not use the drop down box for this. If I want to change the overall colors, what I can essentially just do is go to expression controls and I can just choose, we'll just do like a slider control and we'll just say overall color design. Okay. And essentially what we'll do is, this is a value, right? It's got a numerical value. I'll click on number color, okay? And we'll just say take itself and then add, all right? And we want to add the value here from the slider. Okay, so our number color that's not working either. All right. I don't know why we would need to do an overall color value in the first place, really. We'll look at point control. Point control allows us to control the two-dimensional point of a value. Okay, so like our border, if you remember, if I hit P, right? What I can essentially do is take all of these, all of them, hit P. We're going to pick whip their position. Take all of our, should I unhide our layers? We take all of those, pick whip them to the hit P, pick whip their positions to the border position. So now if I move, just do them one at a time. Control Alt Home. For these minute hands, we also have to, I think, take the anchor point and the position and attach them to the position. Yeah, that's what we needed to do. What was happening essentially was when we told those rectangular objects that make up our minute hand and second thing, we told them to take the position, but because we had the anchor point shifted, what we needed to do is also tell it to take and use the position for its anchor point as well. Actually, no. I didn't do it either. I think I understand now. Let's try this real quick. Rigel Eprime, hey there, man. Rigel saying it's really handy when he's making broadcast graphics. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many different things that you guys can do here with the expressions and controllers. I was just trying to do like a 3D point controller, I guess, you know, more or less. The simplest possible way probably to do it would be to I think maybe if I took all of these, applied an expression control for point control to all of them, and then link them to that point control perhaps. Let's try that real quick. Just wanted to give myself two windows here. So if I alt-clicked on the point control for our center button and pointed it to our point control there, hey Rigel, I have in fact used Pseudo Effect Maker. Pseudo Effect Maker is awesome. Pseudo Effect Maker allows you to take all of these AE controls and build out your own AE FFX files, you know, for doing your motion graphics. In fact, my product Stock 3D, I utilized Pseudo Effect Maker in order to accomplish that, rather than coding everything all out on my own. So yeah, Rigel, I have indeed used it. It's real neat that you know about it. Not a lot of people do. All right, moving on. Let's see here. We'll go back to drop-down menu control. I actually kind of have an idea. All right, so drop-down menu control. If I go to Edit, Start Time, we can say 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. And I'll make 12. And I'll scroll back up. I'll delete that one. All right, so we got start time 1 through 12. All right. So my idea here is if I take my calculator, I do 360, and I divide that by 12. That's every 30, every 30 degrees. All right, so if I go to my start time, Alt-If, and what I can essentially do is I can say if, what we want to do is essentially saying if the drop-down menu here, what the heck happened? All right, so if this drop-down menu is not equal to, in other words, exclamation point, equal sign, it's another operander, not equal to, if this value is not equal to 1. All right. Actually, we'll just say if it's equal to 1. then we will do this following bit of code. We will set this value. We will say that we'll just set the value to 0. Say else if, we'll say else if this drop down menu is equal to 2, right? Then we'll set the value to 30. And we're just going to copy this a bunch of times. Control C. We'll change this to 60. 90. Just want to make sure this is working. Yeah. We gotta say it's equal to 3. It's equal to 4. Yep, it is indeed working. So we're essentially saying if it's equal to 1, i.e. the default value, then set the angle for the start time to 0. If it's equal to 2, set it to 30. If it's equal to 5, we'll set it to 120. If it's equal to 6, we'll set it to 150, right? No. 30, 40, yeah, 150. 30, 60, 90, 120, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. Else if, say 7, 180. Now there's a much easier way to do this, guys. $90, 100, or 210. 9, 20, 30, 40, 240. 50, 60, 70, 270. Doing this the hard way. 280, 290, 300. And finally, if it's at 12, 330. And it's at 13. 3. Actually, I don't even think we need that one because 360 would just put it back to 0. All right. Else. We just want it to take its original value. All right. So start time, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and 12. So you can have it start at whatever hour you guys want. In this case, we have the 1 hour composition. It's going to be 1 frame per second, so it's just kind of doing its thing. Yeah, Rigel. Yeah, switch statement definitely could be used. I'm lazy and didn't feel like looking up a switch statement. I am familiar with a switch statement, also called case statements in other types of languages. That would certainly be an option. I also could have just taken, um, the index and divided it by 360. Right. So if the index is 1, divide 1 by 360. I would set the value there to 12. So 12 divided by 360, would just be 12, and so on and so forth. I could have just done a single line doing it that way. Lots of different options, lots of different ways we can do it. The reason I spell it out here, this way is so that, we don't get into like too many like advanced coding tactics. I'm assuming that anybody here is at least somewhat familiar with expressions, but they're not going to have, essentially a lot of high-end programming knowledge. That's switch statements, if else statements, when statements. You got case statements. You've got else if. You've got for loops. You've got loops that will just complete until something is finished. I mean, there's lots of different conditional logic that you can package into object-oriented programming, and switch statement might be a little bit advanced. Ternary statements also might be a little bit advanced, for essentially checking multiple values. Might just run into problems, as I already am here and there, trying to kind of work people through this. But Rigel, thanks for popping back in. You were here last week, man. I totally appreciate it. So we'll just say, hey, we want it to start at 5 o'clock. And if I wanted to maybe get it to start at 5:30, what I can do is I can just say plus. So I can just say, hey, assign that value plus whatever angle additional that I set. So if I just set this to 1, it's going to be 1 o'clock plus. It gives me the option to if I add 16, it allows me to still make adjustments to it. Kind of like that, actually. So if I chose 9 o'clock, it could start at 9, but then I can make it 9:30 if I wanted, and have it start at 9:30 instead. Certainly useful. Hey, Rigel, were you the one that was asking about some of the issues that you were having with After Effects kind of crashing on you, not working very nicely? I was kind of halfway through the middle of explaining some different things you could do. Maybe I'm not sure if that was you or not. Just set the start time back to 12 o'clock. I'm gonna take this drop-down menu control. Oh, crud. I'm gonna rename it. I'll just rename this. Start time drop down, and it did actually reconnect everything. That's real nice. I was thinking it was going to cause an issue there, where it was essentially going to break the linking, and I was going to have to sit there and play around with renaming it or doing a find and replace, but we didn't need to do that. All right, well, we only got a couple more controllers to look at, I think. Let me see here. All right, so let's look at the, go to clock controls again. Let's go to effect. Let's go to expression controls. Let's go to layer control. So a layer control essentially is something that's very useful. We'll just call this, we'll call this blur control, okay? I want to apply a blur effect, okay? But I want to use a blur that is applied as an effect to my border, okay? So if I go to border, I go to effect, and I just go to blur and sharpen, and I choose Gaussian blur, okay? And I just bump it up a bit, all right? We're feathering out that outer edge, okay? So we'll just make the value 15, all right? If I come to the Gaussian, go to my clock controls, sorry, excuse me. If I go back to clock controls, and I choose the border, okay? Essentially, what I could do is if I were to go to, say, my numbers layer, and I were to go to effect, okay, and I were also to apply a Gaussian blur, okay? If, for instance, this border layer was in another comp somewhere else, or it was nested inside a comp, essentially what I could do is go to the Gaussian blur effect, all right? And rather than have the control here on this reference, if I want all of the Gaussian blurs to reference just the same blur that I have somewhere else, what I could essentially do is take, I'll click on my blurriness, pick whip it to this. Oh, let me make sure. There we go. Pick whip it now to this layer. Okay. Layer not found where number, array, or property is needed. Okay. This effect. Gaussian blur. That's not gonna work yet. I don't know if I'm using this right. Essentially, what the layer control is usually used for is it allows you to take values from a specific layer and then link to them, right? Rather than have the value sit here and persist. Say it's a global variable, something that you don't want to change, you just want to reference to it. This is how you would do it effectively. Um, I'm just having a little bit of trouble figuring out what I've done wrong here. Gauge and blur. I've got one on the effects. Okay. All right. And then on our border, we've got a gauge and blur. It's set to 15. One, two, three, four. No. Border. One, two. You know what, guys? Doesn't help to do a little bit of research here. Layer control. All right, so who's still with me? Rigel, are you still there, bud? Alrighty. All right, so we've used the slider. Uh, Point control we can do on another one. Layer control. For whatever reason, I'm not getting it to work. I think I know what I have to do, but it's not really applicable to the current project. Drop-down menu control we've used, color control we've used, checkbox controls we've used, angle controls we've used, 3D point control, same thing as the normal point control. Okay. But essentially, we've got all of these layers, okay? And in each of these layers, let's see here, we've got 4 effects there, we've got an effect there, we've got 2 effects there, we've got several different, I just hit EE here. You're going to see here that we've essentially written out tons of expressions here, and this is going to be essentially useful and really applicable when you want to essentially hop in and, make changes to a project real fast, okay? So in this case, that's exactly what we've done. We've just got this clock controls effect controller, right? And we'll just kind of go over what we've done so far with everything. All right, so first things first, we've got the number colors, right? So we can essentially just very quickly change those to be whatever color we want. I can make them black in this case. Our back face color, we can essentially just make that whatever color we want, entirely. So just do something crazy. Let's just do like a pink background. All right, and maybe the numbers we can just do same color, but then we just make it darker, right? And then our border color, which we'll probably be able to see a little bit easier here like this. I'm just going to go ahead here, get rid of that Gaussian blur. There we go. Under the border color, we can make that a different color as well. So let's just maybe do like a real nice deep purple. I think would look real good. All right, we've got our scale, right, to scale up and down our clock. We've got our the color controls for our hands here. So right, we can come in here, we can make these whatever color we desire. So I'll make this one like a nice darkish purple, okay? And then the minute hand we can let's make that white, maybe like an offshot pink. All right. And then our hour color hand, something along those lines. All right, we've got a running clock, but is clock running? We can shut that off. Actually, we can't because it's attached to our battery's dead. If I say, yes, the batteries are dead, then the clock will stop running. Otherwise, it will start running. We have a start time option, right? Which is actually going to then be controlled from this start time drop down here. So I can pick a start time, say 4 o'clock. All right, so that will start our clock at 4 o'clock plus whatever value we've got added in here. So if I hit reset on start time, on the stop down drop down, we can essentially pick whatever start time we want by the hour, and then we can add anything to it. So I can say, hey, I want it to be like 5:45. So we've got that control. And essentially have a 1 hour long composition. It's set to 1 frame per second, which essentially allows the clock to kind of just tick along. Very nice. So these are just some of the controls that we've built out here. I've tried my best here to, just kind of off the top of my head. Batteries are not dead. We'll go ahead and just change all our colors back and whatnot. Alrighty. Let's just slap a little background here. behind the clock, something that we can use just to kind of spice things up a bit. Da, 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 da. We don't really need that layer. New solid. Just call this background. We'll hit OK. We'll drop it to the bottom. We'll go to Effect. We'll generate a ramp. Gradient ramp. Alrighty. We'll start the ramp, say about halfway. We'll set the first color kind of a nice dark blue. Second color to match, but then we'll lighten it up a bit. I'm going to drop in a background I've been using a lot lately. It's a video. Should I still have it? There it is. I'll just stretch it. Play with the blending mode. I'm holding on Shift, minus, and plus key to get that. Kind of like the way that looks. I think what we'll do is we will go ahead and just bring this clock comp into a new composition, like so. And we'll take that background, Control X, Control V. We'll bring it in here. Now we'll turn this clock layer into a 3D layer. Control Shift H so that I can actually see everything. I'm going to write another expression essentially. I'm just going to go and hit P. I'm going to Alt click. And I'm just going to open and close a bracket. I'm going to set a X, a Y, value that matches, and then I'm just going to say index. So it's going to essentially take the index value. I'll just say index -1 actually in this case. Index -1 will essentially say this is index number 1. -1 is 0. If I hit Control D, you'll see now that since this is index number 2, it's the second in our order. -1 is 1. I'm just going to duplicate this a bunch of times. Just like that. And then if I go and I take clock 2, put it into its own comp once more, 3D layer, Choose the rasterizing option. I'm going to take this background, Control X. I'm going to put it back in here on the bottom again. I can now rotate this clock layer. As you guys see, it's three-dimensional now because we've essentially made a ton of copies of it. All right, I can take this. I can hopefully not crash my computer, but if I do like CC Plastic and apply it to Comp 2, right, we can turn down the softness a bit. We can say use the blue channels. We'll say luminance or alpha. Turn the height up, turn the softness down. Under light. Just kind of making this a little bit of a three-dimensional clock now. Oh. And we essentially controlled that by writing this expression here on the back end. I'm just going to duplicate it a bunch more times. You'll see that it gets thicker now. Welcome back, Rigel. Yeah, it's got its uses on the occasion. I should have left the ambient color white and put the tint color to that blue. Just kind of play around with the settings here. Just playing around at this point, guys. You know, we've got our clock. We kind of faked it, faked the funk, made it into, you know, a little 3D thing. Yes, it is rendering a bit hard, Rigel. I am essentially dealing with a whole bunch of copies of a 3D layer. I've applied CC plastic pretty much on top of all of it. I'm also hardware encoding this live stream from the same computer system and pushing it out there as well. You know, so there's that to consider. Lots of different things. There we go. Again, it's still playing at that 1 frame per second, unfortunately. I guess in conclusion, I'll just do one last thing here. I can kind of just show you guys, you know, how to turn this into a motion graphics template. Okay, so to do that, you go to Window, you open up your Essential Graphics tab, and you're going to make sure that you go into the composition clock, which is the comp that we're working with. And if I hit Solo Supported Properties, okay, I can essentially, on this clock controls, select all of these controllers. There we go. And click and drag and put them up into this panel up here. What the heck is it not working? It's been a little bit since I've done this, I suppose. Clock. Solo selected properties. Open in Essential Graphics. All right. I am drowning here, guys. I do apologize. My computer is it's fudging up here a little bit. It's pretty much at its max. It's pushing itself pretty hard. I just pulled up my resource monitor in the other tab, and it is hating me. I probably have a huge disk cache to purge here. Not too bad. About 90 gigs there. But all in all, guys, I think you guys can kind of get the idea if you guys know how to use expressions to write essentially features or controls that are kind of automated onto your timeline, onto your different effects, controls, transform properties. That's what the effects controllers are for. You find them under effects, expression controllers. You're going to have all of these different drop downs. I did try my best to kind of give you guys an example in the time that I've had. Unfortunately, some fudging around has slowed me down. But if you guys do have questions outside of this live stream, or if you just want to, revisit this, well, you know what? I think if you do have any questions outside of this tutorial, or if you guys just want to ask me as a follow up question about something, feel free to do so. Seriously, you can find me on creativecow.net. You can also find me here on YouTube. I do check the comments quite frequently. Feel free to jump in there and ask me any questions that you guys might have. I'll do my very best to answer them. I'll also will provide some links to some resources online that gives you a more in-depth breakdown. In terms of different types of effects, expression controllers, and different types of expressions. There's an entire library of pre-built expressions or methods that you guys can call upon inside of After Effects. You can also write your own if you guys get a little bit of a hand or a grasp on code. I went to college and got a little bit of JavaScript coding under my belt, or Java code, I should say. It's almost the exact same thing with JavaScript. It's just a slightly different syntax. So once you guys get the syntax down, or in other words, that human readable language, the ifs and all that kind of stuff, you guys should be good to go. I don't want to make this a 5-hour tutorial like we did last week. That being said, I'm going to do my very best, guys, but I think next week what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be taking a look at tackling. Let me see if I could actually just pull it up here. Pull it up on YouTube here real quick. But I think I want to tackle that Spider-Man, Doctor Strange spell. All right. So if I pull this up, you guys, the new Spider-Man Homecoming film is coming out, this Friday. I'm actually on the verge of trying to get it here at our theater, but there's some cool effects here that you guys can see in this clip. He's got this particle system that follows his finger, as well as obviously his traditional spell on his hand. But I really like this effect, right, with this round text that's kind of like wavy, and it's got sparks and stuff coming off of it. It's got a lot of life. He can spin it around. He's essentially writing the details of young Spider-Man's spell. If you guys haven't seen that scene, it's quite funny. He keeps changing the spell on Doctor Strange. He wants people to forget that he's Spider-Man, but oh no, not my girlfriend. Oh no, not my friend. Oh no, not my Aunt May. And he pretty much just doesn't stop talking. Completely ruins the spell and shatters the multiverse, essentially allowing all the other Spider-Mans and villains from the first two renditions of Spider-Man, going all the way back to the mid-2000s, to kind of pop back into his world. It's a multiverse. In fact, that means anything is technically canon, guys. There's a version of me, as fat as I am, swinging around somewhere in New York City as Spider-Man in another dimension. I'm sure of it. Anyway, folks, yeah, we're going to give that one a shot next week. I've been playing around with it last night. I think I've got a pretty good idea of how I want to achieve the effect, how I'm going to make the text three-dimensional and fit into 3D space. I just got to get some good footage put together for it. But that all being said, essentially, if you guys wanted to get an idea of, what you can essentially end up with if you guys played around with this kind of thing for a real long time, I did go ahead. I made this this video here. This would have been, the other night. But this is essentially a culmination here. Just in conclusion, because we are getting ready to finish off here. I was essentially following the exact same steps that you guys saw here to create those controllers, to create sliders and angle controls and all that kind of stuff for me to control all of this effects, as well as the glow and the trapcode shine and the text position and all of that stuff. It was all created using AE expressions with controllers attached to them. So the sky is really the limit. However, with the limited time that I have here, and the fact that something like this kind of took me several hours, just kind of fidgeting around while not trying to come up with stuff to say. Guys, you guys can really get a good idea of how this all works. Like I said, I'll put in the comment section, as well as the details of this video, some useful links and resources. If you guys have not yet gone over to creativecow.net, if this is your first time kind of checking this out, head over to creativecow.net. It's an online creative community. It's worldwide. There's hundreds of thousands of users. It's been around since 2001. I would say there's probably at least 1 million users. I don't have the exact number, but I found them in 2003. I was just 11 years old. It got me connected with After Effects, got me exposed to it, and I've been pretty much living inside of it ever since. That all being said, I really appreciate all you guys for tuning in and checking this stuff out. I'm going to let you guys go. We'll see you next time.